Attending our council meeting this evening. Let's first rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. We'll start with the financial report. Treasurer, would you like to walk us through results of the last month?
Sure thing. Thank you very much. So the financial report is through January of 2026. So that's 7 months into our fiscal year. That's 58% of our fiscal year. And through the 31st of January, we received about 61% of our budgeted operating revenue. And we've spent about 55% of our budgeted operating expenditures. That's on the operating side. And on the capital side, we spent about $600,000 from our capital budget. And that work is mostly asphalt, concrete, improvements to the park, and town office, and some IT. We, just as a point of information, all the snow that we've had in the last few days, that will be reflected in next month's financial report. We had budgeted about $100,000 for snow removal for the year, and I think we're exceed that by about $50,000. But we have some revenue increases more than we had expected, at least that I had expected. And maybe I'll ask Todd if he might mention a little bit about the January income tax receipts, where we received about $226,000. Todd, if maybe you can explain that a little bit.
You're on mute, Todd.
On mute, Todd.
You're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry about
that. Okay,
Yeah.
now you're not. Okay.
I can explain the, sorry, hold on a second. Sorry. I can give you a rundown of what the distribution consists of. It is more than we've had in recent years for this month. And I've calculated that it will likely bring us in, because we have a recurring payment in February and again in May. And the March and June distributions are pretty stable. I would estimate, or I've estimated, that we'll probably come in around $380,000 of income tax above what our budget projected. The local income tax distribution for January consists of it's the final reconciling distribution for tax year 2024 and the interest penalty distribution for the first half of fiscal year 2026. The total January distribution to counties was $131.3 million. It was 29.7 more than last year's distribution. Other than saying that, I can go into details about how it's calculated and what it consists of, but it's pretty technical in nature. But suffice to say that this January distribution was in fact substantially more than the last 2 years, more in line with FY22, and we got a bump up in 23 for some reason, and I'd have to do some research to explain to you why that was the case, but I can't answer that on the fly right now. But like I said, calculating in the January distribution and the recurring distributions in February and May, along with the pretty stable distributions, generally stable distributions in March and June, I think we may be around 350 to 380,000 more than we budgeted.
That's terrific news. There's a great deal of detail in the packet if there are any questions. If not, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
No, nothing unusual. All according to plan. The town manager's report. Go ahead, Todd.
Sure, I'll highlight some key initiatives that are undertaken by staff over the past month. A lot of these issues will be discussed this evening, so I won't belabor any specific point that will be discussed later this evening at this moment. The staff assisted with responding to 2026 housing bills, specifically the Starter and Silver Homes Act of 2026, Governor Moore's bill that's currently being considered by the General Assembly. Staff also managed the response to the January snowstorm. We're pursuing potential FEMA assistance following that storm. We're just trying to identify if it's available and the correct avenue to pursue that recovery assistance. We also reviewed and negotiated a contract for a speed camera system on Bradley Lane, and that will be discussed in a bit more detail tonight. There is a provision that Ron needs to discuss with you with respect to indemnification. That seems to be the only issue there is prior to ratifying a contract for the system. Staff also reviewed and discussed WSSC's plans for a Zimmerman Park water main replacement and relocation project. Dave reported on that project last month, and so I won't go into any detail. Nothing has changed with respect to the plans. Work is expected to, or construction scheduled to kick off in Q2 of 2026. And we're scheduling a meeting with WSSC to review tree protection and also determine a plan to minimize damage to the park, establish restoration responsibilities, and locate an acceptable staging area for the work. Staff continued discussions with Compost Crew about some service and billing issues. We've also communicated with SHA and Chevy Chase Club about a retaining wall at the intersection of Bradley Lane and Connecticut Avenue that's been reportedly or has been reported by a number of residents to block sight lines for motorists traveling on eastbound Bradley and then proceeding to turn onto southbound Connecticut. Unfortunately, neither the SHA nor the club seems very amenable to working with us to address the problem. SHA is claiming that it doesn't, from an engineering standpoint, pose an issue, and the club doesn't want to modify an amenity, the stone wall in particular, that is in an historic district and is designated as historic. I reached out to Historic Preservation Commission to inquire about the process for lowering the wall, and the head of the HPC, Historic Preservation Commission, agreed that if we wanted to pursue it, that the town could make the request on behalf of all parties, meaning the SHA and the club. But we're going to have to work the traps here and see what we can do. I've invited the assistant district engineer for District 3 from the SHA out to an in-person meeting to get an on the ground, on the boots on the ground perspective of how this wall does block sight lines. And he acknowledged that he would, in fact, join us for such a meeting when the weather gets warmer. So maybe that is potentially the next step in how we convince him that there might be a problem there, rather than just looking at it on paper. Staff also attended an MML meeting, Maryland Municipal League meeting, to discuss streetlight ownership issues. There's an issue right now between the SHA and the municipalities where the SHA is indicating they're not going to assume ownership for lights along the state highways and the major corridors, which doesn't make any sense, of course. They're coming around to finally acknowledging and accepting the fact that they own them. We've reviewed the streetlight list for the town, and we've communicated with SHA regarding ownership of specific lights along the corridors. John Lloyd from the town staff is meeting with SHA on the 18th to go over these, but it's rather pro forma since they now are accepting responsibility for these lights. Staff communicated with Delegate Solomon's office regarding stop sign cameras. Currently, in the last General Assembly session, stoplight cameras were authorized as a pilot program for 4 years to be used by Tacoma Park and Baltimore City. Originally, it was going to be all of Montgomery County that was allowed to use these, but it was pared down to just Tacoma Park. It is a 4-year pilot project, which seems awfully lengthy. And I've reached out to Delegate Solomon's office to inquire as to when and if primarily the General Assembly will perhaps reconsider this and shorten that pilot program window or open up the possibility of other communities using AI cameras for stop sign enforcement. I haven't heard back yet, but I assume she's Delegate Solomon's chief of staff is in the midst of the General Assembly session. So I'll keep trying to get an answer from her and let you know what I find. Staff also collected some speed data on eastbound East-West Highway to determine what the speeds were on eastbound East-West Highway after Maple Avenue to determine what the prevailing speeds were there. I can report that out to the council when John collates the data and reports it to me. We also met with Climate and Environment Committee members to discuss website updates. We continued the FY27 budget preparation process. We also began planning for the 2026 town election, and we provided support to town committees. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you, Todd. Are there any questions? Anything from my colleagues? I have one question. Refresh my memory, Todd, with the work that WSSC is going to do in Zimmerman. I know that generally the park will be available while the work is ongoing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I understand. I think that's what we're going to determine during this meeting that Dave's going to have with the WSSC folk. I think they're abandoning the pipes underneath the park, under Zimmerman, and replacing pipes around the park, primarily along East West Highway and Maple Avenue. But there's no reason to believe that the park, other than temporarily, will be closed for public use.
Okay. Well, the only thing I want to mention is I know that Quinn, I know the the Community Relations Committee is thinking of a yappy hour there.
Right.
And so the work is going to start in the second quarter. You may want to encourage them to have it earlier rather than later so that there isn't any risk of interference.
Sure.
The other thing I think we ought to mention in regard to Bradley is that they have now issued the final report for the improvements that the SHA is prepared to undertake. I know we covered some of this in our last council meeting, but we do have concurrence that they will be putting in the broader white stripe on the north side. And that work should start right after the weather warms up. So March or April, something like that. So that would be a definite improvement there. Okay, good. With that, let's go on to public comments. Anybody who wants to speak, please, Deedon, go ahead.
Deedon Ingram, Willow Lane. I'm speaking on behalf of the Land Use Committee. We met on Monday and we discussed the Starter Silver Homes Act once again. And the committee looked at some of the proposals for how to react to that bill. And most people felt that the town should continue to strongly oppose the bill, that it's just very poorly written, missing a lot of key detail. For example, not allowing those reduced setbacks for single-family homes, not just for townhomes, not allowing duplexes, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the proposals had been that perhaps municipalities or everybody could be exempt from the setback requirements, but they didn't feel like that was sufficient. And we felt like it's so poorly written that it's sort of, they weren't even in favor of coming up with amendments because they thought so much of it needed to be amended and changed. So that's kind of the end of that from us.
Thank you for that update. It is important for the committees to take this up, and the Long Range Planning Committee will be discussing it when we meet, I guess, next week, the week after, but later on this month. I appreciate the input of the LUC. Are there any other comments from anybody at this time, public comments? No one in the room, and I see one other resident on the screen. Okay. With that, we did not have any variances tonight, so that gives us a chance that we may get home in time to watch some of the Olympics, which would be nice. But we do have some important items to discuss. And the three on our agenda are indeed the housing bill that Deedon was just speaking to, the Climate and Environment Committee initiatives. I'd like to hear from the CNE and get your, you guys are very active, and I was talking to Tambra, I suggested it would be a good idea for the council as a whole to have a chance to hear what you're doing. And then also a bit about the winter storm response, because obviously we had an extraordinary event here 2 weeks ago. In terms of the housing bills, I apologize for there just not being a whole lot of materials to really distribute, although I did send some things this afternoon. But that's because everything is moving so quickly and there's just not a lot that's, firmed up. But let me start with a bit of the briefing myself and the things that I've been involved with representing the town on these matters. Carlo has also been joining on all the phone calls that we've had with other municipalities. But also, then I'll turn it over to you, Ron, to provide more detail. Ron Bolt has done a terrific job of working with us and giving us good advice and understanding of the states of play of this. The bill itself was something that we put out in a town crier, and I highlighted in my mayor's message at the beginning of February. So I don't want to repeat the main points here, except the obvious two, which were one, basically it tears away from the town all the authority to regulate setbacks, heights, and massing, which we thought we had secured just last year for all housing units between 1 and 4 units. Beyond that, we would not have that right, but we would between 1 and 4. And then secondly, the bill says that townhomes, specifically of 3 in a row, could be built by right. The opposition has been very strenuous, not just from the town, but from others. Again, pursuant to a town crier we sent out last week, we worked very closely with all other 11 down county municipalities and put together a letter that went to our state delegations, 16 and 18, from all 12 of us, basically stating those key points, that this basically tears up what we all got agreement on last year, and which, by the way, was a bill that Governor Moore signed. He didn't just let it happen, he signed it. And also just how disturbing it would be to have this very substantial loosening of all the setbacks and prohibit the town from continuing the policies that we've had. So that letter we worked on very hard and got it in. And I have followed up with Delegate Solomon, Delegate Chevy, Delegate Kaufman, and with Senator Waldstreicher, spoken to them all about the bill, about the letter. They've seen it, they've read it, and they're considering it. But it's important to recognize that none of them are on either of the committees in the House or in the Senate that are considering this legislation. To that end, I will be testifying at the public hearings that are going to be held by these respective committees. It's the Economic Matters Committee in the House, and the testimony I'll be giving that tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, the Senate, Ron, help me out. What is it called? It's triple
Education, Energy, and Environment.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Housing's not in the title, but it covers this. All right. And I'll be testifying next Tuesday. My testimony is limited to only 2 minutes. So it was a bit of an art form, and I sent around to all of you this afternoon. And I couldn't have done it earlier because I only got around to it last night when I had some time, and I wanted Todd's comments and Ron's comments before I sent it around. But I was able to condense the meaning of the letter into 2 minutes worth of commentary, and hope it suffices. But for the written testimony, I submitted the entire letter. I felt it's fundamental to our ability to have any influence that we do so in connection and with the other communities in the southern part of the county, not just stand out as the town. So I really wanted to clear to whoever on the committees will be reading written testimony that what they'll be seeing from us is, in fact, the testimony from 12 communities, not just one. I think I'll just summarize briefly my overview of some of this, and then I'll turn it over to you, Ron. There's clearly an enormous amount of disarray and just uncertainty about this bill. Everybody recognizes just how extreme it is. And I think the initial sense from the legislators that I've spoken to, and I've also spoken to Councilmember Friedson, who represents us in the county council, is that, gee, this is just so much. Is it going to go anywhere? I was like, really? In an election year? And so, there's sort of a wait and see attitude, I would say. And that's compounded by something which I had not appreciated, but has been explained to me, that in the state legislature, the committees don't really take up and really seriously start considering a proposed piece of legislation until after the public hearings have been held. So they just haven't really come to terms with the bill necessarily. I mean, I'm sure they've looked at it, and some of them have been hit by their constituencies. But in terms of really deliberating on the bill, they won't be doing that until after the public hearings tomorrow and then next Tuesday. But nonetheless, there's been a lot of activity with amendments, and the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is the state agency that's pushing this bill, Their head of legislation, a fellow named Chuck Cook, has met with the Maryland Municipal League, the MML, which we're a member of. So has Jake Day, the head of the secretary of the department. And initially, the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee voted to oppose this bill, much in the spirit of our Land Use Committee, just saying it's too much and too bad and poorly drafted. Secretary Day then subsequently appealed personally and directly to the committee to change their vote from oppose to support with amendments. And that's what the Legislative Committee decided to do. They did this a week ago, Wednesday. And Ron can give more color to this. One of the games that I understand gets played here is that there's a sense of saying, look, if we want to be at the table, we have to be willing to say that we're supportive with amendments. However, the amendments that we plan to put in will effectively kill the bill. And so you've got this really odd dynamic where some parties have probably put in amendments that they actually think would improve the bill, but you have other parties who are putting in amendments with the view that they basically want to torque the bill so much that essentially it's no longer applicable. And one of the key ways that's come up, again, Ron will talk about this more, is to say, let's exempt all municipalities. And the Maryland County Association, MACO, put in such an exemption. And the MML has now come back with one of their amendments also stating the same, that municipalities would be exempted. Whether that's a full exemption or not remains to be clear. And I want Ron to discuss this a little bit as to what the county could still be able to do. But in any event, we've also heard that the state will reject that out of hand, that they're just not going to allow the municipalities just to be exempted if everyone else is covered. So we don't know where this is going to go. There are many other amendments that have been issued, including by MML, which are confusing. Ron put together a very good note that I sent around today, which placed those amendments in the text itself so you can actually see how the language gets changed. I wouldn't say clarified, I would just say changed. But in any event, the only thing that we have now heard, which we hope, I guess I hope will be clear, is that tomorrow the Department of
Housing and Community Development.
Housing and Community Development will come out with their proposed amendments to their legislation. Presumably that will be a response to the quote unquote friendly amendments that they have received. So one reason why we don't have more tonight is because that's going to be a very important document when that comes out, and that may entirely reshape the bill. We may find that we're looking at a completely different thing once those amendments are out there and effectively restate what this bill is going to contain. And presumably it will be that revised bill with those amendments that the committees will then actually deliberate on. That in turn will require us to go over those very carefully, meet again with the other 11 communities, decide how we want to respond, how we want to, and what we may wish to fashion in response. So the whole process is basically going to gin up again, all over again, once we see what those amendments are. And there's no point in hazarding a guess. I mean, we'll find out. It's very difficult to know. So anyway, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of gamesmanship being played back and forth. Clearly, the state knows the bill has to be modified fairly substantially if there's going to be a chance of its passing. How extensively it'll modify that, we'll find out, and whether those modifications make us comfortable or not, or maybe some do and some don't. But we will have to work on it very steadily and very quickly because, as you know, the session only lasts till mid-April, and the crossover date of the legislation, House to Senate and Senate to House, occurs the third week of March. That's obviously going to be essentially only a month away after these public hearings. So with that, Ron, do you want to give some more color on things in particular?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And as the mayor noted, can't say whether this bill will die in committee or will get passed with amendments. We are still at a very early stage, but one positive thing to report is DHCD is listening to all the comments that are coming in from all over the place, all sorts of different interested parties. And I think Mako and MML and others, do carry a lot of weight in DHCD's eyes. And so DHCD's approach has been to try and compile, as the mayor noted, positions of favorable with amendment so that when DHCD reports at the first hearings, it can say it's reached out and had discussions with others and has a list of friendly amendments. And we're not going to see that list until tomorrow. Maybe not until Friday. We'll actually be able to get a copy of it. But we understand generally that there's at least 12 friendly amendments that have been compiled through discussions with MML and others. And I can go through them now if you'd like, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, why don't you just list them out? We might as well get a preview of what those amendments may be.
Okay, sure. So several comments from MML, Mako, and others was that
I'm sorry, just to be clear
effective
though,
date.
I'm sorry, Ron, just to be clear, are you talking about amendments that you believe will come back from the Department of Housing and Community Development, or are you talking about amendments that MML submitted?
I'm talking about the 12 friendly amendments that DHCD will present to the House tomorrow.
Good, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Okay, I just want to make sure it was clear.
Yeah, so right now, as written,
Just to translate the acronym, I was saying
Yeah.
Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, just to make sure it's
correct.
clear.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep. MACO is the Montgomery County, Maryland County Association.
And MML is the Maryland Municipal League. So right now, as written, the bill would take effect in October of 2026. So one common comment by many folks has been to extend that out, and DHCD has indicated they might be willing to bump that to July of 2027, I believe the date was. Currently, the bill as written exempts properties that are designated historic, but only if that designation is already in place. And so another common comment has been properties should be allowed to be designated historic in the future, because if they're historic, they're historic. DHCD has indicated flexibility there and might propose tomorrow that if the building is at least 50 years old, then you could get designation in the future as well in order to be exempt from that law. Another common proposed amendment has been that the law not preempt local statutes that are aimed at preserving the adequacy of public facilities like water, sewer, schools, roads, etc. And DHCD seems flexible there as well. A big issue, of course, as the mayor noted, is the preemption of local setbacks. So right now, for example, the town imposes a front setback of 25 feet or the established building line, whichever is greater. As written, this law would reduce the front setback to 10 feet. And so that was a primary point that the mayor noted in our community letter. And it's also been something, of course, that's been commented on by other jurisdictions. And DHCD has apparently indicated that there's flexibility there, and maybe that they would bring in the established building line somehow. So the established building line is determined typically by looking up and down the street 300 feet and taking the average setback of actual homes in order to preserve existing streetscapes and setbacks, the uniformity thereof. And so it sounds like they might be willing to entertain that. Also, there's been a lot of comments on what is a townhouse. So as the mayor noted, right now the law is written to say lots can be reduced to 5,000 square feet. You can have a single family house on that lot. And you can have a row of 3 or more townhomes. But the definition of townhouse isn't that clear. And so there's been a proposal, I understand, for that to be revised to exclude stacked configurations like you might see in a condominium flat, so that instead townhomes would have to be adjoined by vertical walls, not horizontal walls. But then also, oddly, there was mention of excluding duplexes, and I'm not sure why. We're going to have to pin that down and understand the policy behind that. Then there was a suggestion to exempt areas of the state that are not within the Maryland Planning Department's priority funding areas, which would be mostly rural areas. That exemption would not help the town. As the mayor noted, there have been suggestions that small municipalities be exempted in their entirety. MML suggested that, as well as MACO. And the thought there is small municipalities with little staff would be unduly burdened by having to implement this law and completely rethink their building regulations, apply different rules to different types of construction. So I mean that's something that we're going to have to take a deeper look at and rethink. There's some other amendments, but I don't know what those are, unfortunately. So we'll have to wait until tomorrow to see those. On the point of exemption, as the mayor noted, and as I've been thinking about, even if we were to get an exemption for all small municipalities, let's say, those with a population under a certain size, which I'll note has been done in other states. So I've looked at some legislation of other states, and there are other states that have exempted small municipalities, 5,000, etc., for the same reasons I mentioned. But in Montgomery County, in the regional district, we're subject to some complex rules that make that exemption potentially problematic. So, as you may or may not know, we're subject to what's known as the Regional District Act, which created Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, which is a state agency, to oversee the development around the district, to make sure roads were properly connecting and public facilities were adequate. And so park and planning has exclusive jurisdiction over subdivision and zoning for the down county municipalities, including the town. Some municipalities were grandfathered when the Regional District Act was passed, and that's because they already had planning departments in place doing those sort of things, including Rockville, Gaithersburg, Poolesville, and some others. But the town of Chevy Chase and our neighbors, we don't have planning departments, and we don't have zoning authority. We do have building regulation authority. So as a carve out to the Regional District Act, as provided to us in 1991 and then in 2006 in response to mansionization, we do have the authority to regulate certain aspects of construction in order to prevent the looming of structures and to preserve the character of the community, the uniformity of setbacks, lot space, green space, impervious surface coverage, and the like. Stormwater drainage and the tree canopy are huge issues in the area. The state has recognized that in the past and given us that special authority. And as the mayor noted, we had that clarified just last year with House Bill 1167 to confirm that our authority extends up to buildings containing at least 4 units. And now this new law 1 year later would undermine that we just clarified last year. But anyway, back to the original point I wanted to point out. If we were to get an exemption, we would be allowed to continue to impose our own setbacks, but Montgomery County would likely not be exempt. And Montgomery County, sitting as the district council under park and planning, would likely amend its zoning code to implement this new state law and could nevertheless change the rules with respect to what type of construction is allowed, because that's a zoning decision. So even though we might be able to still impose our own setbacks, the county could nevertheless end up changing what zoning is allowed, what townhouse rows are allowed, how big those lots could be, how many you could squeeze in. So that's something we're going to have to continue to monitor. Right now, as you know, we're subject to the county's workforce housing bill, which was just passed last year, which provides, currently townhouses are not allowed in single family zones unless they're part of a project that's gone through optional method of development at the county level to include affordable housing, either moderately priced dwelling units or workforce housing units under last year's law. So, if this state law were to pass, those affordable housing units would no longer have to be included in a project because the townhouse project would be afforded status as of right under the state law. So, again, if we're exempt, but the county's forced to rethink its rules to comply, then we're stuck with a different framework that we'll have to deal with and probably have to go to the county council to make sure our authority is preserved. So we'll wait and see what's presented tomorrow. I'll report on that. Is there anything else you'd like me to cover tonight, Mr. Mayor?
No, I think that's fine. I think you've covered it and presented a lot more of the complexity. And continued uncertainty. If our lawyer is uncertain, then there's a lot of uncertainty. I'd like at this point open it up my colleagues for other questions and anything you'd like to go over at this point.
I just want to, if you got an exemption for the municipalities, not just small municipalities, but all the municipalities, what would it cover? What would the bill cover then? Counties?
Yeah, great question. And let me try and give you a simpler answer because I know my last answer was probably overly complex. So right now, this law would preempt setbacks, lot coverage. I'll just stick with those two. So let's say we got an exemption for the town. The town would be able to continue to enforce its setbacks and a lot coverage provision, if so desired. However, let's say the county's not exempt, and the county would be forced to rewrite its rules to implement this state law. And one of the things the county would have to do is decide what are the appropriate sizes of lots to accommodate this new row of townhomes. So we have authority to regulate our setbacks and lot coverage for buildings up to 4 units. But let's say the county changes its code to allow a row of 5 townhomes to be squeezed into a 9,000 square foot lot. Then we're out of the game because we cannot impose setbacks and lot coverages on a row of 5 townhomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in effect, while we would continue to have our exemptions right now are under the workforce housing are just up to 4 units. So if the county would say, hey, we want to make 5 or 6 units fit into a configuration of a 6,000 square foot lot of ours, they could do that, and they could do that.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean,
right now I think it'd be difficult to squeeze in a row of 5 townhomes. But let's say the rules were to change and you only needed 1,000 square feet for a townhouse unit.
Yeah, but again, it's the definition of townhouse, because I was thinking about Montgomery Village. They have townhouses that are backed up to each other in a quadruplex area. So you could conceivably, in a 6,000 square foot lot, if you wanted to make a complete thing, you could probably put more than 5 in a 6,000 square foot lot. So,
Yeah,
so the townhouse definition is important.
it is important indeed. Yeah, and as I understand, though, DHCD is going to suggest tomorrow that the definition exclude stacked configurations, and that instead each townhouse must have an entrance at the ground level, and there can't be townhomes on top of each other.
I was thinking more about more of a circular configuration. Wouldn't be circular on a rectangular lot, but you'd have essentially, let's say, 2 or 3 townhouses on one side of the lot and 2 or 3 townhouses on the other side. So you'd have the vertical walls. You'd also have the entrances, but you could put more townhouses within that 6,000 square foot. So it's not that, again, it's the definition of townhouse. If a townhouse, and if they don't share a back, a back wall, that's another thought. A townhouse has to have a front wall and a back wall, and be vertical, have vertical walls separating it from the other units. But you wouldn't want them to be backed up to each other, sharing a back wall.
Yeah, it's certainly something we can look at,
Mm.
and maybe think about the orientation of the front facade.
What I find very troubling about all this is just way into the weeds that the state should not be engaged in. Trying to determine what's the exact look and feel for a townhome. I mean, good heavens, you're talking about something statewide. It's just the state shouldn't be there. If there's an issue about the state saying, look, we want to see higher density, and therefore say by right, you could have 2 units of housing instead of 1, or they could say 3 instead of 1. I don't know. But to try to specify exactly what kind and what shape, and the details of how you get into the home, for example, from the state level is crazy. And I think there's a fundamental point of policy intelligence here of sort of what's the proper role and where do you draw the line? And I think what's going on is that in this effort to have these friendly amendments, they're basically trying to define it so precisely that it either turns out to be impossible to do, or somehow gains some additional support on the other hand. But the end of it is that the state is getting into the details of design issues that the state should not be involved in. That's our job, and that's the job of the county, but it's not the job of the state.
Well, we went through it with even the county. Remember in all of the bills that were proposed before the workforce housing, they had design elements,
right? Which was that was okay. That's what the county planning department does.
Right,
That's what you expect. Yeah. The state doesn't do that.
The state doesn't do it, right?
The other thing I do want to raise with everyone, because we don't know, and we probably will find out soon enough, whether with these amendments that the state's going to put in, the bill begins to have traction or does not. If it doesn't, then fine, it's done. But if it does have traction, then I think we're going to have our own further discussions about how do we feel about those elements, and are there things that we'd be willing to compromise on or push for, because that would be a better outcome than something that we don't engage in, and then it could even be worse. And I think just to mention this quickly here, but for the committees also to follow up on, I think there's an issue here, especially in regard to duplexes. As I've related to many of you in separate conversations, I think if we have the protection of our setbacks and massing, when I've had conversations with residents in the town saying, okay, if this home here on this corner, sometimes I choose some specific homes we know, which are relatively large. And if this house had 2 front doors instead of 1 front door, would that be okay? And the answer is, yeah. I mean, if we know the trees are protected and the same setbacks and everything else, that'd be all right. There could be some concerns about parking, and that arises in some places, but in general, that's a notion that people can grapple with. The more density you apply when you go from a duplex to any kind of 3-unit, whether it's townhomes or triplex or a quad, then you of course lose people. People get more and more concerned about that rising level of density. But at the initial level of a duplex, my feeling is that there are a lot of residents who would be okay with that. They may not prefer it, but if they felt at the end of the day that was better than some other alternative, they would say, okay. But I haven't seen that kind of discussion yet out there in the course of this bill. The state seems to have jumped ahead to say, let's have triplexes, let's have townhomes or nothing. And I don't know why they're so fixated on the idea of a townhome as being the only form of missing middle housing that should be taken up by communities that are already fairly densely built up. But that's what they've decided. So I think that's just something we ought to be thinking about, which is our potential need to show some flexibility ourselves and try to direct what the outcome could be. And, would we be okay potentially, say, with duplexes by right if we knew that all of our existing protections stay in place? So something for us to consider. Yeah, please.
Yeah. I did hear from some people concern about the tree canopy, and you mentioned that the trees would be protected, but I did wonder, what are the implications of this law on the tree canopy and the current requirements?
Right. So as written, the law would not expressly preempt local stormwater drainage requirements or tree canopy, urban forest preservation requirements. But there is a provision in there that raises concern because it says a local jurisdiction cannot do anything to indirectly prevent the placement of a townhouse. And so we were concerned, well, that could indirectly preempt our local laws. But in discussions with DHCD, I understand that's not their intent. And so that word indirectly, I believe, is going to be deleted, and that there may even be inclusion of language as suggested by MML and written by the attorney for the town of Somerset, that the law expressly would not preempt local stormwater drainage or tree canopy regulations. So, hopefully that's in there. Of course, as the mayor noted, our regulations for stormwater and tree canopy rely on the sufficiency of green space available. For example, a buried rain tank or other stormwater drainage device has to be set back, I think it's 5 feet from a foundation, 5 feet from a property line. So, if the front setback is reduced to 10 feet, that eliminates the possibility to put a rain tank or dry well in the front yard, or to plant a canopy tree that needs 900 square feet of growing area. So I think that the DHCD is starting to hear those concerns and making amendments. As I said before, this is an early stage. This is round one. Don't know if the bill will go anywhere, but if it does, I expect it will go through thorough amendments, and tree canopy and stormwater will be a focus.
I'd like to suggest to the council to be prepared for an emergency council meeting, because this could go very quickly, and by the time we meet next in March, it already may be cooked. So just be aware that we could well be calling for a meeting sometime in the next couple of weeks. One other matter that I want to raise, and I don't want to take too much more time in this, but one other matter I want to raise is the issue of governance of the MML. What came out was that the staff of MML received a first copy of this bill in August, proceeded to negotiate, and you've seen the letter that they sent, in good faith with the Department of Housing and Community Development, Apparently, they never showed the bill to any elected member of the legislative committee or the board of directors of MML. I find this quite shocking. And so effectively, when if DEA, DHC, better to me to say it, the Department of Housing and Community Development says that they have negotiated with MML, they have not. They have only negotiated with MML staff. They have not consulted with the organization. And that's a really important point. And I feel strongly about this. I'm going to raise it. We have practically every Friday now, Carla and I and Todd and Ron are on a call with the other municipalities. I'm going to raise this. And with your permission, I'd like to suggest that I hope we'll get all 12 of us, but otherwise whoever is willing to, join in a letter to the MML board, politely, but asking about the process. Is this what you concur with, especially on an issue of such great importance, that the staff would be permitted to carry on negotiations and never even have informed we as an organization of what's going on. So that's just a matter that I think we need to raise. Okay with that?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, anything else on this tonight? Just a lot of stuff to think about. And obviously, as soon as we get these amendments, Ron will put it together and we will then send it around and have to come together.
Will we send a town crier notifying residents of current developments? Just because I have heard people are interested.
Okay, that's a good point. And we haven't sent one since we included the testimony the letter that we sent. Yes, I think it would be a good benchmark whenever we see what these amendments are, because effectively that will restate what the bill is, right? I mean, so at that point, it would be good for us to get out of town crier, and we can certainly get that. Probably ask Ron for your help in drafting it all, but yes, we can communicate with residents, and we should. Okay, on to something local. Something we have some control over, which is good. Climate and environment, please, Michelle.
Do you want me to?
Yes, by all means.
Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. Is the mic on? Looked like there was a green button when I walked up. Okay. So I'm Michelle Grace. I am one of the co-chairs of the Climate and Environment Committee. The other co-chair is Linda Geiser, and she could not be here tonight. She's actually in Spain doing some other work. So I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to allow us to give you an update on the initiatives that our committee is working on this year. First, I thought I would start with a little bit of just quick little information on the committee. We have 17 members who, in my humble opinion, are extremely dedicated and also very fun to work with. And we also have a high schooler on our committee, which is kind of unusual and also kind of fun. So as to how we decided on the initiatives that we are focusing on, you probably remember in the fall, we had a short survey that we sent out to town residents, gauging residents' interest and knowledge in sustainable topics and promotion of a healthy environment. And we use the results from the survey to kind of guide our initiatives for this year. So we have 4 initiatives: recycling and composting, sustainable landscaping and native gardens, solar power and electrification for the home, and website redesign. And I thought I would just take a couple minutes to go through each one of those initiatives and give you a little bit more of a background and idea about what we're doing in those. So for the first one, recycling and composting. For recycling, we are really trying to provide residents with the best information as to what we should be putting in our recycling bin. There is a fair bit of confusion just based on talking to people, plus the results of the survey, that there's probably 35% of the respondents who said we're somewhat familiar with what goes in the bin. So trying to get that information out, and then also providing residents information as to what ends up happening with the stuff we put in the bin, like how much is recycled. And Todd is helping us get some of the questions we have answered from our current contractor. So he's been a great help in that. And then we are also looking into whether other means of recycling, for example, dual stream, could provide residents the opportunity to put more in the bin and or have more materials that go in the bin end up being recycled. So we're just trying to, do some research and get some information on that. So that's the recycling part of that. And then for composting, we have two main initiatives, sub-initiatives we're working on. One is just promoting the town's excellent composting service. There's right now 60% of the respondents said they do compost. That leaves a fair bit of people who don't compost. And I think it's a pretty easy thing to do, but some people don't. And so we're trying to also then provide some helpful tips in like, how do you compost, as well as getting this message out there. So then we can move on to sustainable landscaping and native plants. We have an upcoming speaker in April who's going to be coming and talking about native plants. They are from Brookside Gardens. And we'll be having advertisement around that event coming up shortly. Working with the Community Relations Committee to include native gardens on the upcoming spring garden tour, and potentially having QR codes next to like the native plants so that people can identify which plants are native, what are they. And then we're also working with the town to discuss the possibility of increasing the use of native plants and sustainable management of what we're calling the town's triangles. So the 34 owned kind of little areas around the town. And a number of the committee members met with Todd recently and talked about this opportunity, and Todd seemed to be receptive. And so there's some follow-up that will be happening with that. And as to promotion of solar power and in-home electrification, with the removal of a lot of the tax benefits, and we wanted to do, and we are doing research on cost benefit of solar panels without these tax credits, and then get that information out to residents. And then also researching the cost benefit analysis of hot water heat pumps, because that is another area where actually Maryland is offering a rebate. And so we're trying to get that information out to residents. And then information on community solar. If your house is not able to have solar panels, how do you sign up for community solar? What opportunities are out there? So we've got all of this information that we're gathering and we're working on, and then like, how do we get it out there? So one of the things that we looked at was kind of redesigning the Climate and Environment Committee section of the town website, because that would be a great repository. It currently has a lot of information, but when you look at it, you just kind of have to scroll down this long page, and some of the information is definitely outdated. So one of our committee members who has some experience in website design put together a proposal about here is what we could do to make this very informative, user-friendly, and engaging. And then he and I met with Todd, and well, he actually sent this proposal to Todd, and Todd looked at it, and we met with Todd. And in the meantime, Todd had already kind of changed the structure on the CEC's portion of the website. And we're like, wow, this is great. This is exactly what we were looking at. And so now we just need to go back to the subcommittees and say, okay, what do we want to put on there? And how do we want to add pictures and make this all engaging? So we're working on that as well. And having said all of that, those are our initiatives. We'd love to hear feedback, thoughts, comments on things that we're doing.
Great. Let me open up my colleagues. Temper, do you want to start off with anything you'd like to add?
I think Michelle covered it. I mean, there's a lot going on, as you heard. And, I think, the one thing I think we did talk about is, in terms of exploring the dual stream recycling, how that process might proceed, that's, I think, one thing we're kind of wondering about and wondering if the town council has any thoughts.
Okay. Comments, questions?
Michelle, you talked about reference two things that I wanted to note. The first being with regards to the survey results from the compost, 60% compost, right? So the remaining 40% don't.
Correct.
And that's only of the survey respondents.
Correct.
Which represents what percentage of total population of the
188 responses. And if we kind
Okay.
of assume that a household was a respondent,
Yeah.
that might be correct. It might not be correct. That's what, a little bit less than 20%, 18%, something like that. Yeah.
Right. So seems like it would suggest a lot of room for improvement
Correct.
if the goal is to get people to compost. Do you or the committee have any insight into what either compels people to compost or does not?
So we did, there was some comments about why people don't compost. And people think it takes too much time. It can be messy. And disgusting was one person's comment. And this is where I come to, like, I've been composting prior to, I actually signed up with Compost Crew prior to the town signing up with Compost Crew. I find it incredibly, this is personal, right? I find it incredibly easy. I have a bin on my counter, whatever, and my garbage doesn't smell. I never have to throw my garbage out. Like, there's these benefits that if we could get it out there, that might be helpful for people. So that's what I've heard, and kind of that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to share like anecdotes, people's
Yes.
experiences. The other thing that I took note of from you is with regards to the recycling. There's a lot of confusion of what actually is recycled. I think the distinction that the town uses a different service versus the county is something that warrants reiterating and why that matters.
Yeah.
Right. So what we actually have influence over. I've heard from the people who attended that event, I can't remember what it was, but
Beyond Plastics.
yes, Beyond Plastics, that people would have liked to have walked away with more very tangible next steps.
Yeah.
And so iterating that through the listserv or, wherever people are, I think would be also very helpful. And then just the third thing that I wanted to acknowledge what you referenced is the website, if at all possible, to get analytics around who people, like the traffic and what people actually click on.
Yes, that's a great suggestion. Okay, thank you.
Other comments? I have a few questions. First of all, Todd, how many households are picked up with have composting? That's a statistic we know, isn't it?
Sorry, I just walked away from my desk, but it's 400, about 450 currently.
450 out of 1,000 homes. So
About 36.
close to half. So yes, plenty of room for additional. You referenced how you want to get the information out there, but what is the actual plan that you have?
For the composting?
Well, actually, for all the different topics, what is the actual, and I will say, just as Todd knows, I never cease to say, it's always good to rerun the commercial. You have to constantly find different ways to get the message out there. And, sure, we can put things out on a town crier, which then are picked up and put into the listserv. So you get kind of a twofer that way. But we still find that any number of residents haven't read it either in the crier or the listserv. So we just have to constantly go at it over and over again. So
So
with that-
right.
Prelude.
And we've talked about all of those things. And so we will be having a table at the chili dinner where we have a bunch of all our materials available there. And anytime there's another town event, we will try to come and staff with our materials. We had at the Beyond Plastics event, we had all of our materials as well, and people did stop at the table and come and pick up some information. So it's a matter of hosting events. We've talked about having like bagels and coffee in the park where we then provide our materials. So just trying to think of other ways to touch town residents and get town residents to come, and we can talk to them and show our materials, give our materials, post our materials.
Okay. Well, one thing, and because I had the pleasure of attending it was a pleasure actually, the Olive Street tour.
Yes,
That's good. But I think what came out of that was a need for something very visually clear, especially on recycling plastics. Everybody knows you recycle cans. Everybody knows you recycle newspapers. That's not a problem. But when it comes to plastics, people are very confused. And I would just like you to, maybe you already thought this through, but something very graphic that says, here are the plastics we can handle. Here are the ones we can't.
Yes.
Make it a really clear separate.
Exactly.
Nobody, if someone says, oh, well, we can do, this happened during the meeting, by the way, we were at Olive Street. Oh, we can recycle number 3, 5, and 7. Who knows what that means?
Right. Right.
So we really have to have clarity about what is the kind of plastic.
So we have started that process. We have taken the existing information and graphically made it a bit clearer.
Good.
We've also gone to a couple different town websites, like Berkeley has an amazing what you can recycle, and even a QR code. If you can. You see these bottles, plastic bottles, and they have a number of categories, like big plastic bottles, small plastic bottles, this plastic. And if you have more detail needed, click on this QR code. So yes, we're
definitely have to keep it simple too.
I know. I think the QR code is a little bit much for us right now, but we are trying to make it clear, visual. Yeah.
There's a Goldilocks solution here.
Yes, exactly.
We need to find. Well, anyway, finding that solution and then finding all the ways you can. And it's great to hear you talk to the different methods, but make sure, and certainly the town will be very supportive in getting that information out in any way that you would ask us to.
Thank you.
Good, sure. The other one is on the electricity. I think there also would be, tremendous opportunity for providing information, because I think a lot of us just take on board that the Trump administration has terminated all the tax credits. Therefore, this stuff probably doesn't make sense. End of story.
Right.
And those of us who are in the business know that actually solar panel prices have dropped so dramatically that often it still makes sense to do these projects, notwithstanding the fact that you may not have the same level of incentives. So just really walking through the math of this, how and what it means for the homeowner.
That's exactly what we've done.
That's great. So that's good. And we are facing higher and higher prices.
Right.
And one other thing I'll mention, which perhaps the committee was aware of, but I only found out accidentally. I had a supplier that guaranteed that all the power to be very precise, an amount of power equivalent to what we consume, they would purchase and would be renewable power.
Right.
Okay, it's not, obviously we don't consume it, but it goes onto the grid, the PJM grid. They then notified us in December that they were terminating the contract because of a law passed by the state legislature last year, which I believe was done with the intent of trying to stop certain practices they didn't like. But the net result was that all these suppliers pulled out, and we are left only with the standard offer from Pepco.
Right. I was in the same boat.
And it occurs to me, and something you might want to take up is why was this bill passed? What has to be done to rewind the clock so that once again we have suppliers coming to offer us the opportunity to have the amount of power that we acquire come from renewable sources.
Okay, that's another, we can look into that. Yeah,
That'd be great.
yeah,
And then we could go back to our state delegation and say, wait a minute, correct this
Yeah.
problem that you created,
right.
basically taking away choices that we had.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very
All right.
much.
I just
Really
wanted
appreciate
to make, since I pulled up the images from the website, I just wanted to applaud Tambra for something on the listserv with regards to clamshell plastics. So something that I think organically happened on the listserv was people were like, well, what do we do with these clamshell things? We can't put it in recycling. And I think a couple of residents, Tambra included, volunteered to collect them and bulk ship them or bulk take them to whatever the facility is. I think more of that type of offering would
Right.
be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah, we have talked about that in our committee as well. Yes.
Okay.
And not only the clamshells, but other things that can be recycled. Montgomery County has an amazing recycling facility. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, winter storm response. Todd, I'll turn it over to you first to give us some background and how it went, but actually, I don't want to say, I won't turn it over to you first. I want to say at the outset, and actually, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tambra, because you had some really nice things to say about how the town performed, and I thought it would be nice to put those up front.
Sure. I was just relaying to Barney that, I thought that the town and the town staff did a fabulous job clearing the roads, and our roads were pretty much entirely clear on Monday morning. Whereas when I went out of the town, on East West Highway and other neighborhoods, the roads were not clear. And with respect to the sidewalks, although it took a few days, our sidewalks became clear. And I heard anecdotally that people from other parts of Bethesda are coming to our town to walk their dogs because the sidewalks are clear. And so anyway, I just wanted to relay that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tamara.
I think for all the discussion we're going to have about the sidewalks, I just thought, put it in context that the streets got cleared really fast and done well. And the sidewalks ultimately did get done and probably cleaner than anybody else in the county. So with that being said, now I'll turn it over to you, Todd, to continue.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So I won't go into. I'll just give you an overview of how things went during the recent storm with respect to street snow removal and primarily sidewalk snow removal. This discussion really is just a discussion this evening. It's not. There's no decision point that the council really needs to make tonight. Just take things under advisement and consideration for how we ultimately want to recast the program or the messaging related to the program as we consider how to provide this service in the future. So obviously it was irrefutable that this was a significant, and challenging storm, worst in likely over 10 years. And by all metrics, our street snow removal was very successful. Streets were down to asphalt by almost every street was down to asphalt by noon on Monday. Some complaints we got were, the plow blades created ridges of snow on either side or in their wake. And unfortunately, that's really unpreventable. Our goal was to get the roads passable, all the roads passable as soon as possible. Sidewalk snow removal wasn't as successful, if I could say that, unless you obviously consider the circumstances of the event, of the storm event, and the limitations of our contractor, which I'll get into in a bit. Communications to residents wasn't as clear as I would have liked it to have been, but this was based on misinformation or from our contractor, and some communication about timing of snow removal was in advance of the pending storm, when we didn't know the exact conditions that we would experience. So, and from a timing perspective, it was a bit difficult to tell residents when sidewalks would be fully clear, because the contractor was definitely overextended in this storm event. I guess it's important to note that the town sidewalk snow removal program has performed reasonably well during lesser storm events. In typical snow situations, the contractor has been able to clear sidewalks within an acceptable time frame, and resident feedback has generally been positive. But with this storm, it overwhelmed the contractor's resources, and it certainly exposed structural weaknesses in the program that aren't apparent during routine operations during lesser snowstorms. I think some of the core problems are the contractor not only is the only contractor who performs this service at this scale, but became overextended across at least 5 municipal clients during the storm and its aftermath, and also faced workforce constraints, whether it be due to immigration enforcement issues or the working conditions that the workers had to deal with. It was a pretty brutal storm. These are, limitations in any significant storm requiring full mobilization will bring to the surface again. It's just not preventable. As I said, the contractor's the only vendor in the market that provides this service on this scale. So there aren't any alternatives that I've been able to identify with respect to other contractors who could provide this service on any more of effective basis than our current one does. So regarding, recasting the program or messaging about the program, given that there's effectively only one vendor in the market that provides this service on this scale, I don't that no RFP or request for proposal is likely to produce a meaningfully different outcome because of performance metrics that you would have to include in the RFP, and that the town can't solve the labor supply problem on its own. I think council should consider whether the current program sets expectations that can't reliably be met. Of course, we have to here again consider the circumstances and whether or not we feel that they did the best they could under the circumstances. I think there are two paths forward here. We can either restructure the program itself, which likely means returning responsibility to property owners, along with publicizing resources for residents, or we keep the program, but fundamentally reset resident expectations, making clear in town communications that municipal sidewalk clearance is a supplemental service that may take several days after a significant storm, and that residents should treat self-clearance as the primary response. Because the current framing implicitly promises a level of service the contractor structurally can't deliver. There was a lot of comments, a lot of suggestions that were sent in and proposed by residents and council members. And one was prioritizing certain sidewalk clearance over others to get major feeder streets clear, designating priority sidewalks, routes to schools, bus stops, commercial areas such as downtown Bethesda, routes to commercial areas, including downtown Bethesda. And it sounds reasonable in theory, but it would be operationally, I think, counterproductive. So our contractor works methodically from one side of town to the other to ensure no sidewalks are missed. They throw 30 to 40 folks out there, workers, and they say start here and move. Usually it's eastward to westward. It's a terrible job under the circumstances and given the weather conditions they experienced. I think asking them to identify and navigate to scattered priority locations. Well, first of all, let me say that the sidewalks around Chevy Chase Elementary School are cleared by MCPS facilities maintenance, and the sidewalks around the Lawton Center are cleared by the Parks Department. And so they're taken care of by those two entities. But asking our contractor to identify and navigate to scattered priority locations first would require a level of coordination and responsiveness that they have consistently failed to demonstrate. The contractor is frequently unresponsive to even basic progress update requests. So rerouting crews to priority locations also, in addition to that, the rerouting crews to priority locations would delay the start of systematic clearance, meaning all sidewalks would take longer. So the net effect would be worse overall outcomes, not better targeted ones. And it would leave some folks, unfortunately, without clear sidewalks for a considerable amount of time after a storm, which I guarantee you would raise equity issues and also mean that such residents would have difficulty accessing the cleared walkways from their uncleared walkways. So if the council wants to pursue prioritization, we would need a different and currently a non-existent contractor. It's a resource allocation issue in these storms, and it's not commercially viable for a contractor to dedicate all resources to the town, because this effort takes 30 to 40 workers to do, and in this size storm, 3 to 4 days. If they had started Monday morning, which they didn't, they started Tuesday morning, they probably would have cleared the sidewalks by the end of the day Thursday, rather than the most clearance occurred or was completed by the end of the day Friday, with some additional clearance happening Saturday morning. And then we gave them a punch list to address that day. But the severity of this storm really was such that the resources that were available, clearly the contractor was overextended. The contractor's primary job is tree maintenance. And no contractor obviously is dedicated to snow removal. That would be commercially unviable. But I think what we're dealing with here is overextension of resources, unavailable labor, and the severity of the storm. So I'll stop there and take questions from the council.
Colleagues, comments, questions?
I think that, I mean, based on my observations of the activity on the town listserv, this was the topic of the year in terms of level of engagement, not including just like sidewalk conversations of walking the dog and hearing from everyone's feedback. And I just forwarded you an email that came in this morning from walking the dog. I think there may be some value in acknowledging the feedback we received and maybe identifying like top 3 or 5 points that we heard from town residents and addressing those points as a follow-up communication, just to be completely transparent, because my impression is many of us do not appreciate the level of complexity and coordination that is required for this event. And granted, it is it's a rare occurring event, a storm, but I think the benefit of communicating this is investment in trust between town residents and staff, that we hear them, and that help them understand the implications of some of the things that they've suggested.
So Quinn, are you suggesting that we do that via like a town crier or individually?
Yeah, no. A collective town crier message back to the community. Yep. And I'm happy to help with that.
Right.
I just have one question. I was wondering, why do they typically start in the east and go toward the west instead of the west to the east? I heard someone suggest that perhaps the sidewalks going toward Bethesda might be in more demand.
Honestly, Tambra, it's just sort of how they've done it. They are operationally, they deploy them off of Connecticut and work towards Wisconsin. We could certainly, ask them to start on the west side and move eastward. But as you can imagine, in a storm like this, especially operationally, they're just so scattered that they say start here and just move that way. And it's hard to redirect them on the fly, to take them to certain areas. It's unfortunate that, but it is not the primary role of this contractor to do sidewalk snow removal. Obviously, it's a side job, if you will, and it's a messy and difficult job. But we could certainly ask them to start on the west side of town and move eastward in the future. Whether they heed that is another matter altogether. We do have oversight in the field. Wayne Fowler is our code enforcement officer. He oversees the operations and gives constant feedback on where they're located, progress, etc. But there are so many crews, usually groups of 6 scattered around town, 5 groups of 6 or 6 groups of 6 scattered around town. So it's hard to locate them in any given time. But we could certainly ask, certainly ask that they start on the west side and move eastward.
I just wanted to echo what Quinn mentioned, that I think would be very useful for the town residents to understand the complexity of this. We get, all of us, I think, hear a lot of recommendations and suggestions, and to know that those considerations have been given some thought, and maybe there's a FAQ or something on the town site that we could have for people to use as a resource. I happen to be out of town during the worst part of the snowstorm, so lucky for me. But I wondered if the town ever considered purchasing some equipment. I know some of our sidewalks tend to be narrow and not uniform, but having had experience having to clear a lot of sidewalks in a prior job, when we brought equipment to bear, it really produced a lot and with much less hardship on the individuals that had to do the work. So, that's something to, if you haven't thought about it, think about it. If you have thought about it, it's the kind of thing that would make a good FAQ response.
Sure.
The other thing I would just offer, and I think it was out of the best of intentions for us, and we had some conversation, I think, ahead of the storm and sort of communicating, getting ready for storms. And by preemptively letting our residents know that the town was going to take responsibility for the upcoming snowfall, I think it had the unintended consequence of people who shoveled their walkways quickly choosing to stop there and not continue on to the walkway, the public walkway. You, I think, alluded to maybe changing our policy altogether or somewhat, but I think certainly reinforcing, we could really use people's help in clearing sidewalks and, using whether they do it themselves or hire teenagers or their own landscaping contractor. Particularly in a storm like this, it's a sort of a community responsibility. And I think in this case, even those who could effectively, I think, chose not to do that because of our well-intentioned, preemptive, and based on past experience, pretty, quick clearing of sidewalks. It didn't work out this time. So people had expectations, I think, even higher than normal. And it turned out, pretty disappointed. So just a couple of thoughts I'd throw out there.
I don't disagree.
First of all, I wanted to add to Tamara's discussion about how well the town did on our streets. I want to extend that to our sidewalks. I was walking in another neighborhood, one of the other Chevy Chases, and their sidewalks are abysmal. So in context, I think this is, again, it gets back to expectations of what happens in significant storms like this is things do get overwhelmed. And miraculously, our sidewalks within a week we were able to walk our dogs. And I don't think that's true of any other municipality in the area. So I really liked your thought, Todd, about this as we think about this, the expectations for us ought to be that the homeowners take primary responsibility and we provide a supplemental service. Because if we don't do that, what happens, exactly what happened, if we say we're going to do it and become the primary cleaner of the sidewalks, people just won't do it. You know, they just say, hey, the town's going to do it, so I'm not going to go out and do it myself. But, you know, in this particular instance, I hopefully we won't visit this for another 10 years, but we can create information to people that gives residents what the expectations are, and we need to be clear about those. But I think I think given all of the problems with this storm, the town did an exceptional job, and the staff, I think the staff's already been told that, but they need to be told that again.
Thanks, Rich.
Any other comments? Few thoughts.
Hey, Barney, did you turn
Yeah.
on your?
I just did. Thanks. I had inadvertently turned it off, but I hadn't meant to keep it on. The first, a couple of questions, Todd. In years past, my recollection is that the work was done almost entirely, if not 100% manually. There was no equipment used at all. And I remember asking you once about that. You said, well, that's the way the contractor wants to do it. It just gets in large crews and they just put down shovels and go at it. They don't bring in equipment. This time there was some equipment, some really large scale equipment, and presumably how difficult it was. Where did the contractor get that? Did he own it? Did he rent it? Was it available? And does he basically intend to use that equipment going forward? Or what did this indicate a change in his way of approaching the job or not?
No, and lesser storms, you know, and we've had a number of lesser storms over the last decade, not since, I guess, you know, 2016 did we have any significant snowstorm like this, not even like this, frankly. But it's easier for the crews to manually remove snow. If it's, you know, a 1 or 2 inches, they just take a shovel and they go down the sidewalk, and it you know, it's easy. They don't need the major equipment to bring in to bring to bear on very much lesser snowstorms. It's much quicker for them to use shovels and just shovel aside, you know, a shovel width line down a sidewalk or even wider. And so heavy equipment's not really effective on lesser storms. It's not necessary, and it brings too much to bear, and it's too cumbersome and awkward, and it's too much work to bring all that equipment in. It's just so much easier for it to be done manually. Like I said, the last time though, they brought in this type of equipment, which they own in some instances, rent, and they actually went out and bought some from Baltimore in response to this snowstorm to increase their equipment supplies. They had to do it, obviously. It was impossible to move otherwise. But in lesser storms, it's much easier to move, and it's much quicker to move manually.
Okay. I've never seen equipment before on the streets, even in some relatively major storms. So I had taken that to be their MO. And it really leads to my follow-up point, which is, as I've mentioned to you and to some of my colleagues here, to make a terrible pun, I think we were iced twice. The ice of the storm and the immigration enforcement of the government. My hunch is that the reason why there are a couple of reasons why the crews were not as many crews, and our contractors struggled to find the manpower. One was potentially the workers are working, living elsewhere, and even if our streets were plowed, they couldn't get out to even take a job anywhere. But even beyond that, we all know that for people who are laboring, largely, from other countries, immigrants, that putting themselves in any situation where they become a potential rounding up area for ICE is a very scary proposition. So I'm just wondering whether, at least for a number of years, and who knows what will cause a change, that we're going to see the contractor really impaired in being able to get the number of workers that he wants to get. So, if I know that we've had problems with coordinating with this guy and being responsive, and he himself not knowing everything he was supposed to know. But I wouldn't be surprised, and something I'd really encourage you to have, perhaps sit down and have take them, go out to lunch with them or something, really, have a real honest, candid conversation. Was he surprised at the difficulty of getting crews? And does he see this as a problem that will be recurring? Because if it is, then that's something we have to take on board. Again, to your point you were making about expectations, if we just know that as a matter of course, that if there's a moderately severe storm, and this contractor is also doing Somerset and Section 3 and some other place as well as the town, and if he otherwise thought that he would be able to get 100 workers to cover those different municipalities, but actually he can only get 60, well, that's a big difference. And that's going to stretch out the timeline. It's also, I think, potentially going to change the view about equipment, because obviously if you're short manpower, one way you make up for shortage of manpower is to make them more productive with giving them equipment. So to me, I feel like there's more there that would be good for you to run to ground with him, to really try to get at what he sees as something which we really have to just grapple with and then make a decision. And I think certainly you've indicated the points of how we want to realign expectations and realign responsibilities. I, for one, still feel the program has a lot of value and residents do want it, because we know there are a lot of homes that for whatever reason, people aren't taking care of their sidewalks and won't, or they're traveling or whatever. So being able to have this, but I think how we couch it, whether it is a primary or the backup, I think is the question. But in any event, we need to have the underpinning of what is a realistic timeline for handling heavy snows, especially if, in fact, and it's an if, I'm not saying it will be, but if the contractor feels, yes, I'm in a different world here. I cannot get the men that I thought I could get. And you guys really just have to understand that's a recurring issue. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I think the answer is yes. I've already had the discussion with the contractor. I mean, the contractor can't give me definitive answers with respect to whether the limited resource pool he pulls from, the workforce he pulls from, had decided not to respond due to ice-related issues or ice-related issues, meaning they didn't want to work in the brutal conditions that would have been required for them, and they decided not to participate. He can only surmise, obviously, when he calls these workers and they say no, yes, no. He can't ask the ones who say no, is it because of ice or because of the conditions? He doesn't.
Hey, Todd, just for my own clarity, did you hear from him that he had challenges with staff, shortage of staff?
Yes. But he didn't, he can't, he's not surmising on why. He's either say they don't want to work in these conditions, or it could be immigration related. But he did not ask them, nor obviously should he. And so, it is just, yes, he had a shortage of labor to pull from.
Okay. Well, tonight I just want to make sure we discussed it. I think we have several follow-up thoughts. One is your point, Quinn, about another message to residents, bearing in mind, showing that we've considered different points. But I think that's one. The other is a directive to go from west to east rather than east to west. That actually does make a lot of sense. If the homes are much closer together, you'll hit a lot more. For the same distance of sidewalk clearance, you're going to clear more homes. But also that is obviously within people going into Bethesda using those sidewalks are tend to be heavier usage than others. And discuss the equipment. And I think managing expectations, I think we have to bear that in mind. But for tonight, I just wanted to have the discussion. I'm not looking for definitive conclusions, especially if the next 10 days look like it'll be quite warm. By that time, we'll be really close to the end of February. So maybe this is the only storm we'll have this year. But I do think we want to make sure that we do have a further discussion of it, and that if we wish to change our policy or expectations or anything about the program, that we clearly have that reviewed and decided before next fall for obvious reasons.
I just wanted to add one note that was sparked from this discussion, which is the Good Samaritan. We've received an email of someone basically praising a neighbor who just took it upon himself with a bobcat or something. I don't know exactly what that is, but it sounds impressive to clear the sidewalk. just something to consider just in general to encourage and acknowledge community engagement is like a good Samaritan kind of point system or something where we provide, people can say, oh, I recommend Tambra, or Carlo or Rich or something who did this amazing thing, or Michelle Grace did this amazing thing. Can I give her a $20 gift certificate or something like that? And just as a communication back to the community to show that we heard them, and we're developing maybe this FAQ page, which Carlo recommended. I think it's a great idea. It's just to encourage greater trust and engagement among the town residents, because Rich, I totally appreciate your sentiments, but the feeling from town residents is not that of being thankful per se. Even if they do venture beyond the town, I mean, obviously there's objective measures that we did pretty well relative, but people's expectations of the town are really high.
Yeah, and that's why we need to set them. We need to set realistic expectations. Absolutely. People can, we had one call or one email at 9:30 on Monday morning that somebody complained that their sidewalk wasn't cleared. I mean, we can't have those kinds of expectations of our snow removal program because it's just not doable.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, moving on to the other business, speed camera contract update. Todd, and I guess, Ron, we've kept you here all evening.
Yeah,
Just
sorry,
tell us
Rob.
more about
Yeah,
this.
no worries.
We should reorganize the
Go ahead,
schedule. This was an expensive discussion of snow removal.
Right, exactly. But we have been making some progress on the contract for a speed camera on Bradley Lane, and the negotiations. We've traded a couple versions of the contract with Elevate, the chosen contractor, and we're basically all but done, and to our satisfaction. Ron, do you want to brief
Sure.
the council on any issues you see, or if you think
Yeah.
they've been resolved, you can provide that information to the council.
Okay, yeah, will do. So Elevate has been very responsive to our proposed changes. We started out with a base contract used by Chevy Chase Village that was drafted by my mentor and your former attorney, Dave Podolsky. So we didn't have to do a lot of editing. There was one question that Todd and I raised. We were concerned about one provision that we think we've mostly ironed out. We need to hear back from Elevate. We gave them some additional comments today. So there is a provision in there that provides if we terminate the contract early, Elevate gets a termination fee, which we think is fair because they have some outlay expenses. They're going to acquire and install the camera for us. And so obviously, if we were to terminate early, they'd want to recoup those costs, which we think is fair. But the way they've currently worded it, those termination costs would still apply if we did not exercise the first option year to renew, which is year 4. And Todd and I are thinking in year 4, there really shouldn't be any unamortized costs. So we've asked for a schedule of their unamortized costs so we can see what would there really be in year 4. And they've said they're going to prepare that schedule. So once they prepare the schedule, the issue may resolve itself. If not, I've proposed language that says if we don't exercise the year 4 renewal because Elevate has imposed new conditions on us, then we're not penalized with that termination cost. And whatever termination costs we pay over would be only actual costs as reflected on this unamortized cost schedule that we're yet to see. So we think with those edits, the town will be adequately protected. I think Elevate's going to be fine with that as well. They just asked for our explanation of why we wrote that in there, and we await their response. But yeah, after we hammer that out, I think we've got a good contract, and it'll be ready for execution. Maybe as soon as next week.
Any questions about, I want to, what are we looking at in terms of dollars for these first of all, I agree completely with the schedule. And obviously it should be a downward sloping one. The longer the contract stays in force, the more they recover the cost, the less the payment upon termination should be. Do we have any idea what this schedule is going to look like?
No idea.
No idea. Other than anecdotally, they're purchasing and installing one camera.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, the way the contract is written, it also says.
What do we think one camera costs?
I don't know that either.
What was it?
Yeah, and I don't want to hazard a guess at this point, but I think I remember seeing.
I think 100,000.
And they're saying that it would be, they need 4 years, 4 years to earn a return on the 100, let's say it is 100,000. They need 4 years to earn a return on that under our contract.
Well, Ron, I think we have to look at the terms. I don't know if I can answer that on the fly. I don't know if we are going to, I don't know if they're procuring the equipment new or we're going to actually, if they have the equipment in stock, but it's not that we purchase the camera. It's a lease agreement, right, Ron?
Yes, yeah,
That raises
right.
the other point, which is that if we terminate, and certainly if we terminate at the end of the term of 3 years, the camera doesn't go up in smoke. They take the camera, install it somewhere else. I presume the life of the camera is a lot longer than 3 years.
Yeah, exactly why we need the schedule to see what they're.
But I think, if it's a low amount, I don't know how much we care, but in principle, we shouldn't be. They don't have to be made whole on 100% of their purchase over the 3 or 4 years. If in fact, say it's a 10-year life piece of gear that they're then going to put back in the field with some other customer.
Agreed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we wanted to see the actual numbers because right now, as written, it's open-ended. So
that's impossible. We can't accept an open-ended obligation to make them whole when they aren't defining. So I mean, the classic concept from my background in financing is you'd call this equivalent of liquidated damages. You would have a defined schedule of exactly what is owed under this circumstance, and that's what you pay, and there's no discussion, no argument. So you do all that negotiating up front. I just think the context here is that you've got many years of life left in the equipment, so we don't have to make them whole for their return. We owe them something for the fact that the equipment might not be used for some period of time, or maybe new technology, who knows? Anyway, point is that they don't have to make a profit entirely just off of us if we've decided to use them for only a couple of years.
Yeah, and we've also asked for a not to exceed amount, and they've said that's not a problem, and they're putting that figure together right now.
Okay.
So we've said the termination fee has to be your actual cost, capped at blank, and will be as set forth on the attached schedule. And
okay. Well, that sounds like directionally that's the right way to go. That's good. So we'll have to wait and see what they can come back with for figures. Okay.
Right.
All right. And lastly, I'll turn it over to you, Carlo, for discussion of thank you very much, by the way, for that. I mean, that's great progress, and it's great to feel like in a week or two, we'll be able to announce to everybody that we definitively are getting our cameras. Subject to SHA approval, we have to still remember that has to be obtained, but we're assuming that'll be the case.
Yes.
But I'll be really, really happy to have that camera go up. Not as happy as the residents on Bradley. They're going to be really happy, but I think we all can take some satisfaction that we've made something happen here. So that's good.
Indeed.
All right.
Am I
Carlo?
excused, Mr. Mayor?
Please, by all means. Thanks very much, Ron. Thanks for your continuing help on the work with Annapolis. That's quite a challenge.
My pleasure. Good night, everybody.
Okay, good night. Carlo, how are things going for this?
They're moving well. I sent around a note just before the meeting. I'll just summarize it briefly here. I'm working with two other towns, Chevy Chase Village and Chevy Chase Section 5, as well as the East Bethesda Citizens Association, to host a series of candidate forums for the spring ahead of the primaries, which are scheduled. I think early voting starts June 11th of this year, with election day June 28th, if I remember correctly. We are so currently, I think there's still a few days for which candidates can register, but at the moment, so I should mention first the offices that we're interested in hosting forums or open house for. It's County Executive, County Council District 1, which is the district that represents us, and then the County Council at-large seats. Currently, there are, for County Executive, 5 candidates in the Democratic Party and 1 Republican. For District 1, for District 1, there are 3 Democratic Party candidates and 1 Republican. And for at large, there are 12 or 13, all Democrats. Because Maryland has a closed primary system, we debated, but then decided it didn't make sense to have the single Republican candidate in a forum with the other Democrats ahead of the primaries, which are, just associated with the party. But we would have in the fall, we would plan to have in the fall.
Right. That's good.
And a forum for the primary winners. We are looking at 2 evenings in April, weekday evenings, 1 for District 1 Democrats and 1 for for County Executive Democrats. And then we thought for the at-large, because it's such an unwieldy number, we would have a open house type of setup where we would set up in the social hall table for each of the candidates, and people can just meet and greet and talk to individual candidates. And then we would also invite the 2 Republicans, 1 candidate for County Exec and 1 for District 1, just so they had a chance to meet folks in the community. So all that's moving along the dates we have in mind. I put in the email. I'm having a little bit more difficulty reserving the space than I expected. I won't get into it, but I'm going to try and get that nailed down.
In the social hall, is that
The social hall, yeah. Not to be too disparaging, but the follow through from the rec folks has been pretty bad. So need to try and get that nailed down, because that, of course, triggers invitations to candidates and, notices and all that sort of thing. So hopefully I'll get that nailed down in the next couple of days. Yeah, and I think that's the 3 towns in the Civic Association. We consider ourselves sort of the organizing group. We are going to invite other towns and other associations potentially to, win some support or promote it. We want to have good turnout if we can, but we wanted to get the major logistics nailed down before inviting others. We already heard from Rollingwood that they would like to be a part of this as well. So that's kind of the update. Happy to field any questions if there are any.
Any questions, folks? Well, that's great, making progress. That's super. I think it's going to be very exciting events. Really, really good. I just want to, in terms of the county executive, I have this sense of 3 significant candidates.
Right.
And then 2 others.
Right.
And have you thought that we invite all 5 or make a cutoff after the top 3 in terms of how much time then each of them can?
We are still discussing that, but
okay.
We were wondering whether there's by some criteria, where would you draw a line if you got to,
Okay, we'll leave you to think about that.
we're still thinking about it.
That's good. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sort of 3 and 2.
I wondered, and maybe this venue is too big, but I attended something at BCC that was a community event.
Yep.
So that auditorium might be available.
We had that on the list. We thought social hall at 120 is a good size space. We wanted it to feel like it's full rather than empty. But that's probably the number one backup. BCC is the number one backup if I can't get some certainty with social hall. Everybody liked the social hall in terms of size and location. So hopefully I'll nail that down next couple of days.
There's also one in between, which is the cafeteria at BCC before you go to the auditorium. That's a little.
There's also, I don't know if this is ever used, but is it the Chevy Chase Women's Club on Connecticut Avenue? They have a very big room. That's sort of an auditorium that could be a good possibility. Have you ever been there?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Actually a good friend of mine who organizes events there. So
Okay.
How many people can sit there?
Well, they have weddings that are pretty good size. So probably a couple hundred, I would say.
Oh, okay.
And there's a raised stage. So
That's a good thought. It'd be a nice problem to have, to find out that the social hall is not large enough. But then trying to find exactly the right gradation that still has you feeling like it's full is the next challenge.
Yeah.
So that's good. Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for taking that on. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, is there any other business for us tonight? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.